Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Hiker Sessions, where we discuss backpacking and hiking with thru hikers, day hikers, and everyone in between. I am very excited today for our guest. He is a very successful podcaster with over 1.5 million downloads.
Over 2.5 now, do you mind?
My goodness, you need to update your website.
Yeah, I know, dude. Yeah, I know.
So I'm over 2.5, which is considerably a lot more, downloads of his acclaimed show, Mighty Blue on the Appalachian Trail, as well as the creator of the Hiking Radio Network, which provides a platform for other aspiring podcasters to go on and get their hiking-themed content out to the masses. He's successfully completed 2 northbound thru hikes of the Appalachian Trail. He's hiked the Camino de Santiago Trail in Europe, along with a bunch of other backpacking adventures, which I hope to talk to him about. And by the way, somewhere in there, he made the time to publish 3 books about his journeys, which I've thought about doing 1 book about my journey, and I just keep pushing it off because it sounds terribly time consuming.
You got to do it every day, man. You got to do it every day.
Yeah. And we welcome to the show Steve Adams, or as he's known on the trail, Mighty Blue. So thank you so much for coming on, Steve.
Hey, Bobby, nice to see you, and good to see you looking so well after your own thru hike.
Yeah, I'm a clean shaven. A lot of people didn't recognize me.
Yes, I know. How different, eh? Yeah, you're the clean shaven one. I'm the one with the beard now.
Yeah, that's okay. I'm excited to have you on for a couple of reasons, Steve. One is I feel like I know you because I've been listening to your podcast for over 2 years now. When I made the decision to do my thru hike last year, I was just like a sponge, right? Looking for a lot of stuff. And my brother-in-law actually turned me on to your podcast, and I love it. I mean, I look forward to every Thursday. You do such a great job.
Thank you.
And I'm going to make sure I put some links in here to your podcast because I want to just tell everybody to go and check it out. And then the second reason I'm really excited to have you on is just your passion for the Appalachian Trail in particular, because I'm very passionate about it after doing it 1 year. But I think you even exceed me a little bit, which is where does that passion come from for the trail?
Well, I think the passion came after I did after I started my first thru hike. And you know yourself, once you get out on that trail, it kind of takes a hold of you and you grow more and more in love with it as opposed to less and less in love with it. But, I think it started when I was on a flight. I used to do a lot of long distance business travel, and I get a book and take it with me. And I got Bill Bryson's Walk in the Woods, and I know there's a lot of people who hate that book because he didn't complete the trail. But I don't care. It's funny. But what it did, it awakened in me an interest in doing something like this. And it became, because I lived in England at the time, it went to the top of my bucket list straight away, But I thought I'd never ever do it. And then I moved to America. Then we had a business. Then we sold the business. And my wife at the time said to me, if you're ever going to do this, you've got to do it now because you're not getting any younger. And I was 62 at the time, I think it was, or 61. And so I did. I did it in 2014. And as I said, once you get out there, it takes a hold of you in a way that you could have never have imagined it was going to do. And it became part of me. And when I finished, I started writing the books, and then I eventually started the podcast. I think about the trail every single day, obviously because of my involvement, but I think about it. Even if I didn't have a podcast, I would still think about it every single day because it's the best thing I've ever done.
Yeah, I was going to bring up your accent for people that are meeting you for the first time. You obviously
I'm from Alabama. Yeah,
you obviously didn't grow up with me here in Maine, so you grew up in England, and
yes.
You ran your own insurance company for quite some time.
I did a number of insurance-related things, but I was insurance. I was basically in reinsurance, which is insurance of insurance companies. So I did a lot of worldwide travel. That's where it was. And I ended up in New York and eventually moved down to Florida and quit the insurance business so I could actually do my first hike.
So in 2014, when you hit the trail, you were 61, 62?
61.
61,
yes.
Which is, after doing it this year, that's kind of, it seems like there's a lot of people on the trail on each spectrum, right? There's a lot of 20-somethings.
Sure.
And then a lot of people kind of in the age that you were then and me now in their 50s. When you got on the trail, I don't know if you probably didn't really have any expectations because you didn't really know what you were getting into, right?
I did learn I did learn
You
that
did learn.
all expectations go straight out the window.
Yeah. What challenges did you, before you stepped on the trail, what challenges did you think you might run into?
Knowing what gear to get. I think the gear accumulation, there's much more information now. And I think YouTube was probably starting then. And, well, YouTube had been going for some time, but now there's so much information out there. People can find out so much. And I didn't even realize everything was supposed to be lightweight. So my first backpack, for example, empty, was 5.5 pounds. And, nobody would ever dream of going with something like that now. But I think one thing you do, you become a bit of a problem solver out there. If something doesn't work, you try not to do that again. And you try to then get something that's going to work better for you. All the time, I think your through hiking and backpacking is a dynamic process. You're always altering what you're doing to make it better and better for you. And I think getting into that mindset of changing your attitude and allowing your attitude to be changed by circumstance is a really important thing to learn when you get out there.
Yeah, what was your worst day? Can you remember, like on that 2014, that first tour? Like, what was your worst day or kind of worst experience you had out there?
I think I had very few bad experiences, but I think one day I remember, because I think of all the weathers we face, steady, cold rain is the worst and the most potentially dangerous, I think. And I remember going along it had been raining for some time. And the rain was getting heavier and heavier, and I was completely soaked through. Waterproofs didn't really work for me at all. So I remember standing under a tree because that's right. I was walking along. Suddenly I got hit, and it was what do they call them? Those ice hail. It was a piece of hail. Then I got hit by another piece of hail, and then suddenly they got bigger and bigger and bigger. So I just stood underneath the branches of a tree, trying to keep it off me as much as possible. And I'm standing there, my shoulders all hunched up, trying to stay as warm as I can. And I suddenly feel myself shaking. My temperature's spiraling down incredibly quickly. And I realized then, I just got to keep moving. I have no idea what I'm doing, but I've got to keep moving. So I got out and I started walking. I started pumping my arms. I started singing, shouting, keep going and keep moving on and blah, 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 Anyway, I went down the wrong side of the mountain. I totally lost the trail. And I remember standing in the rain. I'd called somebody and she came to pick me up, and I had a shower, and half an hour later I'm sitting in the warmth with a cup of tea, and I'm just feeling so much better about life. But at that moment, I'm thinking there's nothing I can do right now that's going to make me better other than to keep walking. That was a pretty frightening day, to be honest with you.
Yeah, it is, because you worry about hypothermia and all those
Absolutely.
things. And that's definitely a physical challenge in and of itself, along with weather. What did you find the trail, either the first time or both times, more physically or mentally challenging?
I think most of us know that it is very mentally challenging. I think you get the physicality, whether you've got it or you haven't got it. I mean, I was 245 pounds first time, lost 60 pounds. I was 255 pounds second time, lost 50 pounds, all of which I put back on with interest, of course. But so the physicality, you just have to keep putting one foot in front of the other, and you're burning so many calories, you cannot possibly have enough calories to keep your weight up. So you're going to lose that weight, which makes your pack effectively lighter, and what you're carrying in your body on your legs is lighter and lighter and lighter. So I think it's the mindset to keep going that's the important thing. It's the mental attitude and the coping mechanisms you form to get you through those tricky days. Because darn well, you're going to get plenty of those tricky days out there. Yeah, that's what they call type 2 fun. It isn't great at the time, but looking back on it, you think to yourself, man, I was a badass.
Yeah, were you proud of yourself after you finished?
Proud is a tricky word. I think I felt incredibly accomplished, and I felt that way because I know, and now you know as well, how much it can take out of you, mentally, physically, emotionally as well. I mean, I think all emotions are heightened on the trail far more than I ever expected. So I felt accomplished to be able to finish that. I don't think I ever felt proud about it though, particularly.
Yeah. Did you think you'd do it again?
I absolutely knew for a complete fact I was never going to hike again as long as I lived. And yet, it's funny how it goes, isn't it? You get home, you start being able to walk properly again, you stop hobbling, You start putting weight on again, and you stop eating peanut butter all the time and Snickers. And I remember the moment it happened, in fact. I was watching a film called Mile and a Half about the John Muir Trail. And I'm watching the TV, and I'm just, apparently, according to my wife at the time, she said to me, "You've got your mouth open, just staring at it." And she said, "You want to do this, don't you?" I said, "Yeah, I think I do." And it came over me so suddenly. And then I don't think I've really stopped since. I'm going on a long hike again this year. I'm going back on the Camino this year. So.
Wow, that's awesome. When did you decide? So you did the first through hike on the AT 2014. You did your second one in 2019. At what point in that 5-year window did you decide to do it a second time, the AT?
Well, I think in 2017, I spoke with my niece about doing the Camino de Santiago with me. I thought that'd be a nice thing to do. And once I'd thought about that, and I don't particularly want to get into it too much, but my marriage at the time was breaking up. And I thought to myself, I think if I enjoy the Camino, if I work out how to record on the Camino, which I did, I might be able to do it again on the AT. And suddenly, you know what it's like? It kind of gathers some sort of momentum all of its own. And I thought to myself, yeah, I think I'm going to do the AT afterwards. And I made my choices known, and it happened. And both of them were successfully completed.
Yeah, I want to touch on the podcast a little bit. So in between your first and second one, so I know I've heard you say that you were a real early adopter of listening to podcasts. I think I thought I've heard you say 2007, 2008. You started
2000 late 2007, early 2008. I was listening to lots of podcasts, and I thought this is an amazing thing to see. And a lot of rock bands. I think it was the availability of something that I could put headphones in and listen while I was just walking around. Or I used to live in New York City, and I would just cycle up the West Side Highway, well, on the path, obviously. And I loved listening to them along the way. And one of the ones I found was the Beach Boys did one called The Warmth of the Sun, no longer available, unfortunately, where the guys were talking about the songs that they'd released over the years. And it was just a wonderful, wonderful podcast. And so I never wanted to do a podcast particularly, but I wanted to record an audio book from my books, which I'd already written. And I found a local library, and I met some guys there who were podcasting, and they were chatting with me. And they said to me, "You should totally do a podcast." I said, "Why?" He said, "Have you heard yourself?" And my voice has changed over the years, I know. I've got much hoarser, and my voice is getting older and more reedy and so on. But I know that having the English accent hasn't hurt my podcast at all.
No, it's a great podcast. And so you started it, and I think, was this week your 470th?
About 470, yeah. But yeah, I had to admit, there's a gap of about 15. I intended to record the Southwest Coast Path hike last year, but I screwed up with the audio, and I wasn't happy with it. So I decided in the end, I'm going to do it eventually, but with a better microphone, sitting down in a bit of comfort with a glass of wine in my hand or something.
Yeah, that sounds good. And I know it's a lot of work for sure. Just doing these videos myself, it's a lot of work and time. What fuels your desire to keep the podcast going and putting one out every Thursday?
I get letters, emails from people a lot. Surprisingly, actually, how many times people will say something that will inspire me to carry on doing it. Because you're right, I wouldn't say it's hard work, but I'm retired. But I have to allocate, I think, for a 1 hour episode, I probably have to allocate 4, maybe 5 hours on a Wednesday. Wednesday is podcast day, by the way. But then, of course, there's also the recording at different times. As you know, I do a pre-recording conversation so I can work out the story I want to tell and then go away, come up with my questions, because I know where I'm going from beginning to end. So if somebody then wants to take me on a tangent, I'll go with them. But I'll always bring it back to my questions because I know where I'm going to the end. And so that gives me some structure around what I can do. Once I've got it, I can then upload it, and then I actually edit, as I say, on a Wednesday. But I've improved my editing so much recently. It's really cutting that down probably by 40, 50% in terms of time. I'm not going to tell you why, but it works out well.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. So you finish in 2014, you get into your podcasting, you're doing that. You do the Camino with your niece in 2018.
Yeah.
And then you hit the ground walking
Yes.
back at Amicalola. What were your you had to have some sort of expectations that second time doing it in 2019, right? Because you'd done it 5 years ago. What did your expectations look like for that starting that second time?
The only expectation I think I had was that I had a shot. And the reason I had a shot, because I knew what I was doing. When I first went out, I knew nothing. And I made so many mistakes. Second time round, I made very few mistakes. I did some dumb things, but they weren't necessarily mistakes. They were just unlucky, I guess, a few times. But I remember walking. Do you remember when you go down from Springer? You go down the pathway, about 0.9 of a mile. You go across the parking lot. Then you head off into the woods. And I remember heading off into the woods. I left behind some ladies who'd run me to the back end of the Springer. Started walking, and I remember thinking to myself, oh my God, I know exactly where I am. I know what I'm doing here. And when I first went, I remember thinking to myself, is that a bear over there? That burned out tree? Or is that a snake? Is that root a snake? But for me, I just embraced it the second time. None of it fazed me. I wanted to see animals. I actually only saw one bear second time. Funnily enough, I saw 9 first time. But yeah, I felt very comfortable where I was, and I knew what to expect. And while I'm sure it's great for some people to discover McAfee Knob by just turning up there, for me, the anticipation of going there that particular day, we stayed, and second time we stayed the night before in the shelter just below McAfee Knob. So we knew we were going to get it at sunrise, and I knew what it would look like. And that was even better than I thought it was going to be. So yeah, I was ready for it second time, most certainly.
Yeah, it sounds like you were certainly more confident. Did that confidence also kind of parlay itself into knowing you were going to, we all worry about getting injured and stuff like that, but the second time you're like, yeah, I'm going to make it because I did it.
No,
and I
never thought that. No. And I don't think one should either, because it's so, this is such a difficult thing to do. I've had 1 or 2 emails. Some people say to me, it's just walking. Yeah, you're right. It is kind of walking. It's so much more than just walking. There's a lot that can go wrong inside your head that really I'm sure some people just wake up someday when they're in their tent, they've had a bad 5 days, it's raining again, they think, I'm going to go home. They make that decision, they go home. What I've done, I think I've learned how to cope with those things when they go wrong. And I know this too shall pass. I'll get through this. Tomorrow will be a better day. And it normally is a better day. So I could cope with it, could move on with it and carry on enjoying it. I never for once thought I was going to finish until I started climbing Katahdin.
What was the biggest difference for you between the first and second time that you found, other than just the confidence and things like that? Was there anything that jumped out at you?
Yeah, there were. It's one of the saddest things, and I realised this when I first got to, I think, the second shelter. Everybody, when they get to a shelter, will sit down. They're exhausted from the day. They might set their tent up. They'll sit inside, or they'll sit on the picnic table. And the first thing to do is get their phone out, because there was more service the second time round. First time round, I found service at virtually none of the shelters. So for me, I think, people would come in and that was their first thought. In 2014, they'd come in and they start talking straight away. Now, fortunately, if there was no service at the shelter, the evening was far better for it, because people start talking and you had a great evening with a bunch of like-minded people.
Yeah, it's very interesting you say that. When you said that, I vividly remember I was spending the night at the shelter just south of the Kennebec River crossing at a shelter there. I forget the name of it, but I took a picture, and I remember getting home and going through my pictures. I just, it was just one of those candid things. Everyone was around, and
Sure.
There were probably 8, 9, 10, 11 people, and almost everyone was looking down at their camera or their phone when I took that picture. And I was like, but with the advent of far out and things like that, it's a double-edged sword, so they say. You need those things. But I totally agree with you, because you, like me, really enjoy the community.
Absolutely.
When you started out, of course, Bill Bryson had his buddy with him.
Yes.
Did you think that you'd be like, well, I'll just kind of do my own thing as I go and then talk to people, because you like to talk to people, enjoy talking to people like I do, and find out about them. Did you think you'd probably just do your own thing and meet people along the way and then finish by yourself?
When I set up first time, I had no idea until that first night at the very top of Springer Mountain. There were people who were sitting in the picnic table. They'd all scooch up when you would come along. I found immediately people were much more welcoming to the old guy than I was expecting them to. You know, I spent an evening talking with a 21-year-old girl and her father. And I was speaking as much with her as I was with him. And she was happy to talk to me. You know, we were just hikers out there together. So the age really didn't matter at all. And that's something I never quite expected. Second time, I was very confident I would meet a bunch of people and I would spend a lot of time with a bunch of people. And I did walk with one guy, Trigger, from about 500 miles to the end. So, yeah, I enjoyed that. Although there's always a compromise to be had, isn't there? You know, if you're hiking with somebody, you're then hiking their hike as much as yours. So I think you always have to be careful with that. But I enjoyed hiking by myself. I enjoyed hiking with people as well.
Yeah. What was one of the things, I know I talked to everybody, and everybody has different degrees of what things they learned on the trail, either about themselves or just in general. Were there things that you learned the first time, the second time, or either turn that you're like, you know, I mean, it didn't make a huge life change or anything, but just some things that you learned that like, you know, that's something I might take back to my day to day. Was anything?
Yeah, patience. Funny, I'm writing about one of my Caminos now, and I wrote that, you know, in everyday life, we have a smorgasbord of options. On the trail, your only option once you're walking is to carry on walking or stop walking. There's virtually no other options. And I love that. So I think I enjoy less is more, far less keen on stuff than I used to be. I'm happy to wear the same T-shirt all the time, frankly. I like it washed, but, you know, apart from that, I'm patient, much more patient than I used to be. And I think it made me a better person. I mean, I've had a past which probably wasn't as good as it perhaps should have been. And, you know, I'm far happier with who I am now. I would say this, though. I hiked in my 60s, and in the previous 40s, 30s, and 20s, I was pretty successful at what I was doing. I was making a heck of a lot of money. And now, in my 60s, I make virtually no money. And I think my 60s were happier than any other decade of my life. So take that for what you will. But for me, hiking has done that for me.
Do you think you would have had those same learnings, if you will, if you'd done it in your 20s?
No, I was a shocker in my 20s. No, I wouldn't. I don't think I wouldn't have been able to do it. I don't think physically I was much stronger, obviously, but mentally I was so much stronger in my 60s than I was in my 20s. And I think I would have given up at the drop of a hat in my 20s because I think I've got so many other things I could be doing. So I would have gone home.
I experienced a lot of positivity on the trail. And I don't know if it's because we're all out there doing the same thing, but, you know, I think about you having that conversation with that 21-year-old young lady. How is that, and I'm going to ask you an unfair question here, the positivity that's out there, does it just stay out there in the woods, or how something like that, can we bring that back into our daily lives to maybe infect more people? Have you given any thought about that?
Yeah, we can't. I don't think we can. I think part of it is our doom scrolling that we do. You know, I saw a bunch of kids the other day. I remember when I was a kid, with a bunch of my mates, we'd be waiting for a bus to go to school. We'd be fighting each other, be pushing each other in the road and messing around. I saw a bunch of kids when I out on my walk the other day. There were 10 kids. There was 6 feet between each of them, almost like social distancing each, not talking to each other. I mean, at that age, they should be talking to each other. And that is not going to, I don't know how they're going to change it. I don't think they can mandate things like that. But I think we have that problem we don't seem to be able to get over. In the woods, it's such an equaliser. But life outside the woods is not an equaliser. Until we make that more of an equal playing field, then I don't think it's ever going to happen, no.
Yeah, no, unfortunately, I agree with you. The equalizer thing, I had a young man on, former Marine, late 20s from North Carolina. Met him a few times on the trail, just a great young guy. And I had him on for an interview. And one of the things he said really struck a chord. He said he went on the trail with an open mind.
Sure. He
said he ended up talking to people that he never would have talked to in his life. You know, a 70-some-year-old lady who had been dreaming of doing the trail, or a 40-year-old lawyer, and he just he felt so fortunate to be able to have that opportunity to talk to somebody else than just like his 20-something-year-old buddies that he was in the Marines with or something like that. Were there any conversations? I know you mentioned the 21-year-old young lady. Were there any connections you made out there that not only surprised you that you made, but maybe you still text them or email them occasionally?
Oh, several people I did that with, but I would go back to a conversation I had one night. I don't know where it was. It was my first hike. I met this guy who'd retired from the army. He'd been a major in the army. And he worked as a medic, and he worked in the limb recovery unit in, I think it was Iraq. And his job at the end was that he said, I don't care what your politics are, he said, but I would say, he said, every time America goes to war, we learn so much more exponentially about medicine practices and what we can do with people. We can now save far too many people because we're patching people up, sending them home, real physical wrecks. And it was his job at the end in the limb recovery unit to decide who people should operate on first and who they should not bother operating on. And that really obviously got to him. It got to me that night. I remember going to bed that night thinking, oh, that's awful. We stayed in touch quite a few times. He was a guest on my show, and he committed suicide about 3 years ago. And I pretty much sure I know why, because this was he was living with this all his life. So it was a terrible loss. And I've known a number of other people who've been on the trail who committed suicide because they just couldn't cope with life in the real world. So
yeah,
sad.
Yeah, I think the mental health part of the trail, obviously the trail doesn't do it, but as you said, it kind of exacerbates maybe some feelings and things that
Definitely.
you have going in. I met a guy in Damascus, then I ended up hiking with him for 2 weeks through New Jersey and New York. He was about my age, early 50s, a retired detective out of North Carolina, Zeke. And probably a couple of weeks after I got back, he had texted me and he knew that I'd done Kilimanjaro, and he reached out for that.
Sure.
And then unfortunately, like a week and a half later, I'd heard that he had taken his own life. And, this was someone that I had spent time with for a couple of weeks. And, obviously he had demons, but I think the mental health part of hiking, I think, can be really positive though.
I totally agree with that. Yes.
Right? Not only getting phones out of kids' hands, but just things like, what's your thoughts on that?
I know, even just going for a walk in my local neighbourhood, I went for a 4.2 mile walk this morning before it was light, with no backpack, just walking along. And every time I get back from that walk, I feel light. And it allows me to start my day properly. I'm in the right frame of mind straight away. I don't even have to be listening to something, although these days I'm listening to quite a few audiobooks. But just being out there, knowing that my body is responding well. I had a bit of a pain in my hip the other day. You know what it's like when you're on the trail. You have a pain somewhere and then it's somewhere else the next day. Yeah. So I was walking along the other day and I had this pain in my hip. Thinking, oh my God, that's not good. I hope that goes by the time, I'm leaving for the Camino. And of course it was gone before I got home. Because my knee was hurting then. So the physical well-being, when I come back from that walk, it sets me up for the day every time. I have a decent breakfast. I start writing at 9 o'clock. I finish at 11. I do some podcasting if I need to. I've got some orders to my day now, which I really enjoy. But it all has to start with that walk these days. And I've walked every day for the last 4 or 5 months.
Wow, no, that's great. Let's just switch to a little bit lighter subject. I occasionally I'll talk about gear and things, but that's, I don't know. I don't get into that as much as maybe other people. I think there's a lot more important things, but like some favorite parts of the trail. So having the opportunity to do it twice, you really got to, and probably the second time you absorbed it even more. What were some different sections or parts of the trail that you, like, especially the second time, you were really looking forward to? Like I said, I know you said McAfee Knob, but were there any things that you were really looking forward to more that second time?
Well, I know that I was looking forward to Max Patch the second time. The first time, it was a magnificent day. A bunch of us all sat around and fell asleep in the afternoon. It was just beautiful. Second time around, it was totally socked in. I couldn't see a darn thing. But you know what? That is no less magical because of it, though. That's the thing I often say. take your views when you can, because if you don't take them now, they may not be there in 5 minutes' time. 100-mile wilderness. I slack packed through the 100-mile wilderness for the first 4 days last time in 2014. In 2019, I went all the way through, and we had some food delivered, halfway through, but I loved the 100-mile wilderness so much the second time, much more than I did the first time. I think other places. Woods Hole Hostel, I missed first time. I went the second time. So you discover different things along the way. Virginia I enjoyed. I know some people don't like Virginia, but I loved it. It was great. It was being on a lot of ridges, which I particularly enjoy, And also I think your opinion of a day tends to be shrouded a little bit if the weather's bad. So, I always think to myself, give it another chance, go back another day, see what it's like that day. And if you still hate it, well, you hate it. But there's very little on the trail I hate, even though everybody hates the rocks of Pennsylvania. They're part of what the trail is. So I embraced it. I really look forward to the climb up from Lehigh. That was great. I love that. And so generally, there's virtually nowhere that I would say I didn't like at all.
Yeah, I think whenever I had a bad day, I'd say, well, I'm on the Appalachian Trail.
There you go.
I'm out here, something I've been dreaming about doing. What about trail towns? And I know, like I said earlier, you're big on the community. What about trail towns that you just really love? And unfortunately, we've had some weather that disrupted some of them earlier.
Sure.
Or, late last year. But what are some of the trail towns that you really like?
Well, it was sad for me to see. We went up to Hot Springs earlier this year, a few of us. And I loved going through Hot Springs. I loved Elmer's. I liked the diner. Smoky Mountain Diner, just at the beginning of the town. And I like Hot Springs, I like Damascus. Not a massive fan of Duncannon, I must admit, especially that horrible walk over the Susquehanna River at the end. That drove me crazy, actually. What other towns? I think I enjoy the trail more when it's not in a town, frankly. So, actually, I like Franklin. Franklin was great as well. So,
yeah,
I think it took more. The more south, I enjoyed the towns more because there was more access to them, I guess. But frankly, I just like being on the trail.
Yeah, I was at I'm a member, a volunteer for the Maine Appalachian Trail Club, and we had our annual volunteer gathering just recently. And I met a gentleman there, and he had hiked the Appalachian Trail in 2000, 2005, 2010, 2015, and he was going to do 2020, but then the pandemic hit. And then he said, well, my days of hiking that long are over. But I was interested asking him how much the trail had changed in 5 years. What did you see, if anything, that changed just in 5 years on the trail that you were like, oh, that hostel wasn't there? Were there things that jumped out to you in just 5 years that changed?
I think because I've been involved in the podcast and spoken to a number of different people over the years, I was more aware of the trail and what we were doing to it as hikers. For example, some of the paths that just go around the side of mountains where it's just a fall off to your left and it's put your hand out to the right, you touch the earth. It's that steep, and yet there's this little path you can walk along. With my two poles, my pole on the outside was sometimes loose on the earth, and I almost feel I'm knocking that path further down the hill, if you know what I mean. So I noticed some of that sort of stuff. But generally, I found, because there's a consistency with the shelters, I think I kind of look at my hike and think about it as time between shelters. And so those shelters are all the same. Paths look much the same to me second time round. Or perhaps I'm just not noticing stuff.
Yeah, no, I'm sure. And where your connection was still talking to hikers and everything, bringing things up, I'm sure it definitely helped. Just a couple more questions. People talk about, I'm never going to do a long trail again or anything like that. Do you think you would ever do the Appalachian Trail again? And then a second part of that is, why did you do the AT a second time instead of doing like the CDT or the Pacific Crest Trail as working toward your Triple Crown?
When I was hiking the second time, I was a guest on a podcast while I was hiking the trail. One of the interviewers said to me, why would you want to hike the Appalachian Trail a second time? You've already done it. And I said, why wouldn't you? I had such a great time. I knew it would be different. It was different. I met loads of different people. I never met a single person the second time who went first time. So, for me, it was an entirely unique experience. And of course, knowing what to expect, I knew, for example, that going to McAfee Knob at dawn was the thing to do. So that's what we did. So I knew enough about it. So I'm very happy with going the second time. I'd kind of like to do the Pacific Crest Trail, I guess. I'm 73 this year. I suspect I'm less likely to be able to do the Appalachian Trail another time. But, I'm feeling good right now, so I feel fine. So I'm not sure. I never say never these days, because I did say never after I finished first time. And, of course, look what's happened ever since then. I haven't been able to stop.
It's not a race at all. 2014, you went northbound. Did you even ever lightly consider going southbound that second time?
Listen, God love them for doing it, but my gosh, why on earth would you do that? Why would climbing Katahdin be your freaking approach trail? God's sake! And it's so difficult. New Hampshire and Maine is so difficult, but it's only made easy because you've done 1,750 miles to get to the border, and then you're okay. You got your hiking legs. To get your hiking legs doing New Hampshire and Maine, I just can't imagine it. And going up Katahdin on that first day would be horrific to me. So we'll call that a no then. We'll call that a no, okay?
Yeah, I've met many people who do that, and and then of course going south through the 100-mile wilderness in June at the height of mosquito
lovely.
and black fly season. I volunteer for a section in there, and I've taken many people out of the 100-mile wilderness where they're like, if the AT is going to be like this, I'm out. I'm out. So
funny if you say that. I should imagine that's what happens to some hikers. They think to themselves, I can't all be like this. But then I think, what a fantastic experience. Once you get through, you go over the Connecticut River, which is into Vermont. After that, compared to what you've just done, it might be, you would probably think, well, it's not bad, but it's not great like New Hampshire and Maine were. So I think going northbound is the only way to do an Appalachian Trail through hike, from my perspective anyway.
Yeah, for that, and also the epic picture at the end of the, standing at the sign doesn't, and me being from Maine, I'm like, there's no way. I hate to say this and admit it, but I don't think I would ever do it SOBO. Even if someone said you can't do it NOBO ever, I still don't know if I would do it SOBO. I would just section hike it or something. Last question, and this is a selfish question because I do love your podcast. Where do you see your podcast going in the future? Just kind of randomly jumping ahead, or do you have a plan?
I've never had a plan with it. I thought I was going to stop when I hit 70, which was 2.5 years ago. Because I feel, and people, I think my listeners will tell me by not showing up anymore. We get over 1,000 downloads day one, every single time. There's never a time. So I know I've got a solid core of listeners who listen to it straight away. While I still have people want to listen to not so much what I'm saying, but what some of my guests are saying, as long as I can get that community and share that community with listeners, I think it's an important part of the trail in many ways. I mean, I don't want to put too much on it, but I really think that I know that when I've been to trail days, for example, people have come up to me who are hiking the trail that year and have said to me, "Do you know you're the reason I'm doing this?" Almost like they're blaming me. So, because your guests and you have made me realise by listening to you for years that I could actually do this, and if there's something I can make people understand that this is doable. I still think people listening to my podcast think, if that fat old bloke can do it, then I can certainly do it. And that's what they're thinking. And so they get out on the trail and they realise they can. This is not something that's so difficult. It just feels difficult all the time. It's a case of putting one foot in front of the other, getting correct gear, learning by your mistakes, eating as much as you possibly can, and you'd enjoy that, and then moving all the way forward to Maine. It just works out.
And I always worried about I won't know what to do, where to go, where do I get the shuttles, how do I resupply? But the community together figures it out. Like, where water is. I know what time the shuttle shows up. That's what I really liked about it the best. Well, he is Steve Adams. He's Mighty Blue on the Appalachian Trail. I definitely would encourage everyone to check out his podcast. You can get it wherever podcasts are, and I just really want to thank you for fitting my little show in here in the middle of doing all the stuff that you have going on. Wish you luck
Of course.
on your Camino hike coming up. I'll be waiting every Thursday morning early to hear how that went or is going, and I really look forward to it. And really, thanks again, Steve, for coming on the show.
Well, it's my pleasure. And of course, you're part of the family now, Sloggy. So of course I was going to come on anyway. So awesome. I'm happy to be here, and I wish you well, obviously, with the channel.
Thank you very much. Have a good day.
Thank you, buddy. Cheers then.
Bye-bye.
Bye.